The evening had started like any other for Caleb, the quiet rancher who lived miles away from the nearest town. He finished feeding his horses, checked the fences, and walked back toward his small wooden cabin as the wind grew colder. Winter had come early that year, and long stretches of empty plains made the cold feel even sharper. Caleb was used to silence. In fact, he preferred it. Years of living alone had taught him to be comfortable with his own company, even if some nights the loneliness felt heavier than others. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with soft orange and purple colors, Caleb noticed something strange near his barn. At first, he thought it was a stray animal moving in the shadows. But then he saw the figure stumble, almost fall, and grab onto the fence for balance. It wasn't an animal. It was a person. Caleb narrowed his eyes and stepped forward cautiously. No one wandered this far out without a reason. When he got closer, he realized it was a young woman, an Apache girl, no more than 19 or 20. Her hair was long and dark, braided loosely, and her clothes were worn from travel. She was shaking, not only from the cold but from exhaustion. Her breath came in shallow bursts, and her legs seemed ready to collapse at any moment. Caleb stopped a few steps away. He didn't want to frighten her more than she already was. "You all right?" he asked, in a calm voice. The girl lifted her head slowly. She looked scared at first, as if unsure whether he was friend or foe. Her eyes were wide, filled with fear and cold. Then she swallowed hard and whispered, her voice trembling, "Please, just one night. I can't stand it." Her words were barely above a breath, but they carried so much pain and desperation that Caleb felt his chest tighten. He could see clearly now that she wasn't dangerous. She was just lost, cold, and tired. He had heard stories of Apache groups traveling through these lands, especially during the changing seasons. It wasn't uncommon for someone to be separated from their family or group during a sudden storm. Caleb nodded slowly. "Come on," he said, keeping his tone gentle. "You need warmth. And food." The girl hesitated, as if unsure whether to trust him. But the cold wind pushed her forward, and she followed him into the barn, where the wind was blocked. Then he led her inside the cabin. The warm air from the fireplace enveloped her, and she let out a shaky breath of relief. Caleb noticed how thin she looked, how her hands trembled as she hugged herself, trying to soak in the heat. He took off his coat and placed it around her shoulders. She flinched at first, then slowly relaxed as the warmth covered her. Caleb moved to the small stove and heated a pot of stew he had made earlier. The girl watched him carefully, as if still afraid he might turn hostile. But Caleb stayed calm and respectful, keeping a comfortable distance. When the food was ready, he placed a bowl in front of her. She stared at it for a moment, then whispered softly, "Thank you." Her voice was sincere, almost surprised. She ate slowly at first, then faster as she realized how hungry she actually was. Caleb didn't speak, letting her take her time. He wasn't used to having company, and he didn't want to overwhelm her with questions. After she finished eating, the girl shifted closer to the fire. Her hands stretched toward the warmth, and her face softened for the first time since he found her. Caleb sat on the other side of the room, giving her space while still keeping an eye on her in case she needed something. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steadier. "My name is Naira," she said quietly. "I was with my family, with my people. We were traveling before the storm came." Caleb listened without interrupting. "I went out to gather herbs," she continued, "but the wind changed fast. I tried to find my way back, but everything turned white. I could not see anything. I walked for hours, maybe longer. I thought," she paused, her voice tightening, "I thought I would not survive the night." Caleb nodded slowly. "Storms out here can fool anyone," he said. "Even ranchers like me get lost sometimes." Naira looked up at him, her eyes filled with surprise. She had expected him to judge her or blame her, But instead, he spoke with understanding. Something in her face softened even more, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her chest. "It is very cold outside," she whispered. "I was shaking so much, I thought my body would stop working." "Well, you're safe now," Caleb said. "You can stay the night. I'll keep the fire going." Naira lowered her gaze, and for a moment, her shoulders relaxed completely. Caleb saw that she wasn't just cold, she was frightened, lonely, and exhausted. The storm must have taken everything out of her. He prepared a small sleeping space near the fireplace, giving her blankets and a soft place to rest. Naira touched the blanket gently, as if she couldn't believe someone had offered her comfort. Caleb stayed on the opposite side of the room, pulling a chair close to the window and sitting down quietly. As the fire crackled, Naira lay down but kept glancing at him. She was still unsure, still scared something might happen. Caleb noticed her restlessness and said softly, without looking directly at her, "I'll be right here. Don't worry. You can sleep." Quote, 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 quote. For a while, she simply watched him, learning the shape of his face in the firelight, the rough beard, the tired but kind eyes, the strong build of a man used to working the land alone. She didn't sense any threat from him. Instead, she sensed patience, respect, safety. Eventually, her eyes closed, but she woke up again within an hour, gasping from fear. She had dreamed of the storm, of the cold wrapping around her like a trapping hand. When she opened her eyes and saw the fire still burning and Caleb still sitting there, she felt calmer. "Bad dream?" Caleb asked quietly. She nodded, unable to speak. "I'll keep the fire bright," he said. "You're safe." Naira breathed slowly, letting the warmth settle inside her. She tried to sleep again, and this time she slept longer. Caleb stayed awake for most of the night. He wasn't sure why he felt responsible for her safety, but he did. Maybe it was because she reminded him of how fragile people could be. Maybe it was because he knew no one deserved to be alone in the cold. Sometime near dawn, Naira woke and found Caleb asleep in the chair, his head leaning against the wall. She sat up quietly, looking at him with a strange mixture of gratitude and curiosity. He had stayed awake for her, kept the fire alive for her, and given her more kindness than she expected from a stranger, especially one from a world so different from hers. She whispered his name softly to see if he would wake, but he didn't stir. She smiled faintly. For the first time in hours, she felt truly safe. The sun rose slowly outside, casting warm light into the cabin. Naira gathered the blanket around herself and sat closer to the fire. The long night was over, but something else had begun, something she didn't yet understand, but could feel deep inside. She had asked for one night, but that one night had already changed both of them more than either realized. Morning light entered the cabin slowly, touching the wooden floor and climbing up the walls like a warm, gentle hand. Naira woke first, wrapped in the blankets Caleb had given her. The fire had burned low, but there was still enough heat that she didn't shiver. She sat up and looked around the quiet cabin, listening to the soft sounds of the early day. The wind humming outside, the faint creak of the roof, and the steady breathing of Caleb, who had fallen asleep sitting in the wooden chair. She studied his face in the soft light. There was something peaceful about the way he slept. No tension, no worry. Just a calm expression she imagined he rarely showed when awake. Caleb looked like a man who had been alone for a long time. A man who had learned to survive not just the land, but the silence that came with it. That silence would have frightened her before, but now it simply felt warm, as if the cabin itself protected her. Caleb stirred slightly, opening his eyes as the morning grew brighter. When he realized Naira was awake, he sat up straighter and rubbed the sleep from his eyes. "You get any rest?" he asked, his voice still rough from sleep. Naira nodded. "Yes. Better than I thought I could." She hesitated. then added softly, "Thank you." Caleb shrugged in his usual quiet way, but the look in his eyes showed he was glad she felt safe. He stood up and stretched, then moved toward the small stove to prepare breakfast. Naira watched him place a pan on the stovetop, add water, and mix simple oats inside. The smell of warm food slowly filled the cabin, making her relax even more. As they ate together, Naira looked out the window. The fields outside were covered in frost, sparkling in the sunlight. It was beautiful, but she remembered how cruel that beauty could be. A cold night in open plains could end a life quickly. "Sometimes, storms come without warning," she said quietly. "And sometimes, they take people away." Caleb nodded. "This land doesn't forgive mistakes. I've seen ranchers get caught out in the cold and never make it back." Naira lowered her gaze. "I thought that would be me. But it wasn't," he said gently. "You made it here." She gave a small, shy smile. There was warmth in his voice. Not pity, just simple human kindness. She appreciated that more than anything. After breakfast, Caleb stepped outside to check on the animals, and Naira followed him. The cold air stung her cheeks, but she felt stronger than she had the night before. The horses snorted softly as Caleb walked around them, checking their hooves and adjusting their blankets. Naira stood quietly for a moment, then approached one of the horses slowly. She reached out her hand, letting the horse sniff her fingers before gently touching its mane. "You're good with animals," Caleb said, slightly surprised. "In my family, everyone learns," Naira replied. Caleb nodded. True enough. For a moment, the two of them simply worked side by side, not speaking much. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt natural, like they both understood each other, even without many words. Later, when they went back inside, Caleb added wood to the fire. Naira sat near it again, warming her hands. She seemed calmer now, almost peaceful, but Caleb could still see a shadow of fear in her eyes. He knew that fear wasn't just from the storm. Getting separated from her people was dangerous. She must have felt lost in more ways than one. After a while, Naira began to talk more easily. "My family is moving toward the riverlands," she said softly. "There is more water, more food there. Many families are traveling." Caleb listened carefully. He didn't want to interrupt. "I was gathering herbs for one of the older women," she continued. "I do that often. I know the plants well." But the wind changed too fast. The air filled with white dust. "I couldn't see the way back." "It happens," Caleb said. "A storm like that could confuse anyone." Naira looked up at him. "Do you really think so? Some men say that if someone gets lost, it is because they are weak." Caleb shook his head firmly. "Not true. I once lost my way coming back from town. Had to spend a whole night under a tree with nothing but my coat. Thought my fingers would freeze off." He gave a small, honest smile. "Does that make me weak?" Naira studied him for a moment, then smiled softly. "No. It makes you human." Caleb didn't respond, but something in his eyes changed. He wasn't used to anyone saying things like that. Most people in town talked to him politely, but distantly. No one had ever said something so simple, yet so meaningful. As the day went on, Naira found herself helping Caleb with small tasks. She swept the floor, folded blankets, and even helped wash the dishes from breakfast. Caleb tried to stop her at first, saying she was a guest and needed to rest, but she insisted. "It helps me feel normal," she said. "If I sit still too long, my mind goes back to the storm." Caleb understood. Activity could keep fear from returning. When the sun reached its highest point, Naira stood outside for a moment, looking at the distant hills. Her eyes softened with longing. "My people must be searching for me," she said quietly. "They will find you," Caleb replied. "The weather is clearer today. Tracks will be easier to follow." She nodded, but a part of her seemed unsure. She wrapped Caleb's coat tighter around her shoulders, remembering the cold night she had survived. The memory made her voice tremble again. I thought I would never see my family again. Caleb stepped closer, not too close, but close enough that she felt supported. But you will. Naira took a deep breath. The wind brushed her hair across her face, and she tucked it behind her ear. She glanced at Caleb with gentle eyes. You stayed awake last night, she said. Caleb shrugged lightly. Couldn't let you freeze. Wouldn't be right. Would. Naira looked at him in a way she hadn't looked at anyone, before, a quiet look filled with gratitude, trust, and a kind of calm she had never felt around strangers. She whispered, No one has ever helped me like that before. Caleb didn't know what to say. He simply nodded and looked out at the plains. But inside, her words touched him deeply. He had spent so many years alone that he had forgotten what it felt like to be thanked with sincerity. As evening approached again, Naira began to grow uneasy. Caleb noticed her glancing at the door and the window, as if checking for danger. He asked gently, Something bothering you? She hesitated before answering. The night frightens me now, she said. Last night, I kept thinking the storm would come again, or that something would find me out there. You're safe here, Caleb said softly. Nothing's going to happen. Naira lowered her eyes. I know I asked for just one night, she whispered, but can I stay? Just one more? Only until morning? Caleb didn't even need to think about it. Of course, he said. Stay as long as you need. Her shoulders relaxed immediately, and she let out a breath she had been holding all day. She felt safe with Caleb in a way she couldn't fully explain. It wasn't just the cabin or the fire, it was the man who stayed awake to protect her, the man who treated her with kindness, the man who never once made her feel unwelcome. That evening, they shared a simple dinner. Naira told stories from her culture, legends of the sky, tales of the animals, and memories of family gatherings. Caleb listened with genuine interest, quietly absorbing every word. As the night deepened, Naira settled near the fire again. She looked at Caleb with soft eyes, full of trust. Thank you for everything, she whispered. Caleb nodded and added more wood to the fire. Get some rest. I'll keep watch. Naira closed her eyes, comforted by the warmth and by the presence of someone who understood silence the same way she did. The second night was easier than the first. There were no storms, no fear, and no loneliness. Only the soft glow of the fire and the quiet bond forming between two people who had met by accident but needed each other more than they realized. The next morning came quietly, with a pale sun rising over the plains and a soft breeze drifting through the open fields. Caleb stepped outside early to check on the animals again, while Naira remained inside the warm cabin, folding the blankets she had used. She felt stronger now, both in body and mind. But there was still a nervous feeling inside her chest that would not go away. She kept looking out the window, as if expecting something to appear on the horizon. When Caleb returned, he noticed the way she stood near the window, her hands lightly pressed against the frame. You're expecting someone, he said gently. Naira nodded slowly. If my people are searching for me, they will come this way. They always look for tracks. You helped me walk last night. They might find those steps. Caleb looked at the ground outside. The frost had melted in places, leaving soft mud. Footprints might be easy to notice. They'll find you, he said. No doubt about that. Naira breathed out nervously. She knew she wanted to see her people again, but she also felt uncertain, almost afraid of what might come with them. She wasn't sure how they would react to seeing her with a rancher, especially one they didn't know. Caleb noticed her hesitation. You want to go back, don't you? She nodded again but didn't look him in the eye. Yes, but I don't know how they will talk to you. Some might think wrong things. Caleb shrugged calmly. Let them talk. I know what happened, and so do you. His steady words comforted her. She admired how calm he stayed. Even when the situation was complicated, she wished for a moment that she could borrow some of his calmness to steady her own heart. Hours passed quietly. Caleb chopped wood outside, and Naira helped gather small pieces from near the fence. They spoke only a little, but every word felt important. The morning was peaceful. But peace never stayed long in the open lands. Around noon, Caleb suddenly stopped swinging the axe. He stood still, his eyes fixed on the distance. Naira noticed immediately. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Caleb raised a hand. "Stay close. Don't worry." She stepped beside him and followed his gaze toward the horizon. At first, she saw nothing. Then, slowly, dark shapes began to appear. Horses, several of them, moving in a steady line. The riders were approaching fast, their silhouettes clear against the bright sunlight. Naira's breath caught in her throat. "My people," she whispered. Caleb nodded. "Looks like a search party." The riders grew closer, their horses kicking up dust as they came. Naira wrapped Caleb's coat tighter around herself, suddenly shy, suddenly unsure. She didn't want her people to misunderstand why she had stayed here. She didn't want anyone to think Caleb had mistreated her. She looked at him with worry. "What if they believe something bad?" she asked softly. Caleb looked at her calmly, his expression steady and free of fear. "Then you tell them the truth." Naira breathed deeply, trying to stay brave. The riders finally reached the ranch. They stopped a short distance away, raising their hands to signal peace. There were 5 of them, wearing traditional clothing decorated with beads and feathers. At the front sat a tall young man with sharp eyes. Naira's older brother, Tahan. The moment Tahan saw her, his expression changed from worry to relief. He jumped down from his horse and rushed toward her. "Naira," he called out, his voice filled with emotion. Naira stepped forward quickly. "Brother." She almost ran to him. Tahan held her shoulders and looked at her carefully, checking to make sure she was not injured. "We searched all night," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Mother could not sleep. She feared the cold had taken you." "I'm safe," Naira said softly. "I found shelter." Tahan looked past her toward Caleb. His expression changed again, still relieved, but now cautious. "You stayed here?" he asked her. "Yes," Naira answered firmly. "He helped me. He kept me warm. He gave me food. He saved my life." Caleb stood still, respectful, giving them space. He knew this moment wasn't about him. Tahan studied him carefully, his eyes sharp and protective. He took a step forward. "You are the rancher here," Tahan said in a steady voice. Caleb nodded. "That's right. You found my sister?" "I found her near the barn," Caleb replied. "She was cold, tired, and alone. I couldn't leave her outside. Anyone would have done the same." Tahan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in testing honesty. "Not everyone," he said quietly. "Some would turn away." "Well," Caleb said simply. For a long moment, Tahan just looked at him, trying to see if there was anything hidden behind his calm eyes. But Caleb's expression remained steady, respectful, and truthful. Tahan eventually nodded slowly. "I will thank you," he said, tapping his chest lightly in his people's gesture of respect. "You protected my sister. You gave her shelter. You kept her alive." Caleb returned a small nod. "She's strong. I just helped a little." Naira stepped between them, her eyes soft but confident. "He helped more than a little," she said. "He stayed awake the whole night. He kept the fire alive. He did not leave me alone." Tahan looked at her, then at Caleb again. Slowly, his shoulders relaxed. The other riders also softened their expressions. They saw Naira standing beside Caleb without fear, without discomfort. Her calmness spoke louder than any words could. One of the older riders stepped forward. "You have our thanks," he said respectfully. Caleb nodded again, humble and quiet. Naira looked up at her brother. "We should go back," she said. But her voice carried a hint of sadness. Tahan didn't miss it. He looked between her and Caleb, with thoughtful eyes. Caleb stepped back, giving them room. "I'll get your things," he said. But all Naira had was the blanket and his coat. She held them close. "You can keep the blanket," Caleb said softly. "Cold nights are still ahead." Naira looked at the blanket, then at him. "What about your coat?" she asked. "You can keep that too," he replied. "It helped you once." Her fingers tightened around the coat. She wished she had something to give him in return, something that carried meaning. Her mind raced to find words. Before she could speak, Tahan placed a hand on her shoulder. "We should return before night," he said gently. Naira nodded, but did not move. She looked at Caleb with eyes full of emotion, gratitude, respect, and something deeper that neither of them could name. Caleb opened the cabin door for her, and she stepped outside with the search party. Just before climbing onto her brother's horse, she turned back. The wind lifted her hair slightly as she looked at Caleb one last time. "You didn't just shelter me," she whispered. Caleb didn't know how to answer something so sincere. He simply nodded, holding her gaze with quiet strength. As the riders turned and began to leave, Naira kept looking back over her shoulder until the ranch grew small and distant. Caleb stood outside long after they disappeared beyond the hills. The silence returned, but it didn't feel the same. Something inside him felt strangely empty, like the cabin had lost a piece of warmth it didn't even know it had gained. He returned to his chores after a long moment, but every sound, the wind, the horses, the rustle of grass, felt different now. He didn't understand why, but he knew one thing for certain. Helping Naira had changed something inside him, and the way she looked back at him had changed even more. The days after Naira left were quieter than usual on Caleb's ranch. Caleb had always lived alone, but the silence felt different, now heavier, almost echoing. He tried to fall back into his routines, waking early, feeding the horses, repairing fences, hauling water. But every time he stepped into the cabin, he noticed how empty it felt, without the soft sound of Naira's breathing near the fire or her gentle footsteps moving around the room. He found himself glancing at the blanket she had folded neatly before leaving. She had not taken it with her after all. She had left his coat behind too, folded with surprising care on the chair he had slept in. Seeing the coat felt strange, like a quiet reminder of a warmth that had visited his life only to slip away too soon. During those days, whenever Caleb sat on the porch after a long afternoon's work, he would look toward the distant hills and wonder if Naira was safe. He imagined her reunited with her family, sitting beside a warm fire, laughing with familiar voices, telling her story of survival. He hoped she was happy. That hope, however, did not stop the ache in his chest that grew a little each evening. On the third day after she left, Caleb took his horse out to repair a fence far along the property line. As he rode, he thought again of the moment she had looked back at him before riding away, the softness in her eyes, the quiet tremble in her voice. He tried not to think too deeply about it, but it stayed in his mind like a gentle mark he could not erase. He spent the whole day fixing broken posts and tightening lines. Evening was approaching by the time he finished. The sky was painted with long pink clouds stretching across the horizon. Caleb mounted his horse and began riding back toward the cabin. A cold wind brushed across his face, and he tightened his scarf. As he approached home, something caught his attention, a shape near the edge of the porch. At first, he thought it was an animal, maybe a stray deer, but then the shape moved, shifting gently, almost nervously. Caleb slowed his horse and narrowed his eyes. It wasn't an animal. It was a person. He felt his heart jump, something in his chest beating faster. He guided the horse closer, trying to make out the figure standing there. The wind blew, lifting the person's long hair, and then Caleb recognized her immediately. It was Naira. She stood there alone, wrapped in a thick, woven cloth, decorated with colorful patterns. Her braid rested over her shoulder, and her eyes lifted toward him the moment she heard the horse. She looked nervous, hopeful, and relieved, all at once. Caleb stopped the horse a short distance away. He stared at her in disbelief for a moment, unsure if she was real or just a trick of his tired mind. "Naira?" he said quietly. She smiled softly. "Yes," she whispered. "It's me." Caleb climbed down from the horse and walked toward her, still unsure why she had returned or how. "What are you doing here?" he asked gently, not wanting to overwhelm her. Naira held the woven cloth tighter around her. "I came to thank you again. Properly this time," she said. "I couldn't stay away without doing that." Caleb looked at her carefully. She seemed different from when she left, more confident now, her fear replaced by a quiet determination. He could see that she had thought a lot before coming here. "You didn't have to come all this way," he said softly. She nodded. "I know. But I wanted to." She stepped closer to him and opened the woven cloth, revealing several small objects she had carried. She held them out with both hands, colorful beads made from polished stones, a small pouch filled with herbs, and a folded piece of cloth woven with bright patterns. "These are gifts," she said, "from my mother, from my family, and from me. It is our way to show gratitude." Caleb hesitated. "I don't know if I deserve all this." "You do," Naira replied firmly. "You did not just give me shelter. You gave me safety. You gave me hope on a night when I thought I would not live." Her voice softened. "My family wanted to thank you, and I wanted to see you again." Caleb took the gifts slowly, his fingers brushing against hers for a brief moment. The wind moved gently around them, and Caleb felt warmth rise in his chest, surprising him. "Your family let you come alone?" he asked carefully. Naira nodded. "Yes. I told them I wanted to bring the gifts myself. They trust me. They also know you helped me with respect. My brother said I may come if I wished." Caleb looked at her quietly. "And you wished to come?" Her eyes lifted to his. "Yes." He felt something tighten in his chest, not pain, but something warm and meaningful. He motioned to the porch. "Come inside. It's cold." She nodded and followed him into the cabin. As soon as she stepped in, she looked around with a soft smile, remembering the warmth of the fire and the quiet comfort of the room. Everything looked the same, yet it felt different now that she was here again. Caleb placed the gifts carefully on the table. "These are beautiful," he said. "Honestly. They are made with care," Naira replied. "I wished to bring something that carried meaning." Caleb looked at her from across the small room. She stood near the fire, warming her hands, just as she had that night, but this time she wasn't shaking from cold or fear. She stood tall, with calm eyes that seemed to search his. They talked for a long while about her family, about their journey, about how they found a good place to settle near the river. Naira told him she had been helping her mother prepare for winter and gathering food with the others. Caleb listened quietly, nodding at the right moments, asking gentle questions. Their conversation was slow, easy, and comfortable. It felt like they had known each other far longer than a few days. As the sun set, painting the cabin in soft orange light, Naira looked at Caleb with a softness that made his heart beat faster. "When I was lost in the storm," she said quietly, "I thought I would never see my family again. But during that night, when I heard the fire crackle and saw you sitting there, watching over me, I felt something I never felt before." Caleb waited, not wanting to interrupt. "I felt safe," she continued. "Not just because of the fire, but because of you." Caleb swallowed, unsure how to respond. "I just wanted to help." "You did more than help," she said, shaking her head gently. You gave me kindness. You protected me. You cared when you didn't have to. He looked at her for a long moment, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. Naira, you reminded me that loneliness doesn't have to last forever, Caleb said softly. I didn't know how empty the cabin felt until you left. Her lips curved gently. Not quite a smile, but something close. I will come again, she whispered. My family said it is all right. We live near the river. Not too far. I can visit. Caleb felt the warmth in his chest grow stronger. He nodded slowly. I'd like that. Naira stepped closer to him, her voice gentle but full of promise. This place, your ranch, it felt peaceful to me. Like I belonged here, even if only for a little while. Caleb held her gaze, feeling something change inside him, something quiet and meaningful, like the beginning of a new chapter he never expected. You're always welcome here, he said. Naira smiled softly, the kind of smile that said more than words ever could. They walked outside together as the sky darkened, standing on the porch while stars began to appear above. The cool night air brushed against them, but Caleb didn't feel cold. Not anymore. Naira looked at him once more, her eyes shining gently. Thank you, Caleb, she whispered, for everything. He nodded, his voice soft. Take care on the way home. I will, she said, and I will return soon. She mounted her horse, turning it toward the hills. But before riding away, she looked back at him, just like she had days earlier, but this time, with hope instead of sadness. Caleb watched her disappear into the distance, feeling the quiet return to his ranch. But the silence no longer felt heavy and empty. It felt like the beginning of something new. And he knew, deep in his heart, that Naira would return. Not because she needed shelter, but because two lonely hearts had found something in each other that neither expected.